The place cards were cream-colored with the names in dark blue ink, and my daughter stood beside the long table reading them the way she read everything, completely, from left to right, missing nothing. We had arrived early. That was my fault, if fault is the word. 22 years of shift work builds a clock into you that does not know how to arrive anywhere at the stated time, only before it. The invitation had said 7. We had walked into the Renner estate in Mission Hills at 6:34, and a staff member had shown us through an entry hall taller than my house into a dining room where the light came off a chandelier the size of a rescue boat, and my daughter had gone quiet in the way she went quiet when she was taking inventory. The long table ran down the center of the room. 20 seats, maybe 22, place cards at each one. 2 round tables sat near the back of the room, close to a service door that swung both ways. 10 seats each, no place cards. Tess looked at the long table. She looked at the round tables. She looked at the long table again, and I watched her do the math, because my daughter always did the math. A woman was setting the last of the place cards. Tess stepped toward her, polite, hands folded, the posture she used with adults she didn't know, and said, "Excuse me, do the scholarship students sit at this table?" I had some questions about the Foundation's engineering mentorship program, and I was hoping to ask someone on the board. The woman opened her mouth to answer. She did not get to answer. A man was passing behind the table, silver-haired, tall, moving through his own dining room with the unhurried authority of someone who had built everything around him, and he answered without fully stopping. He said, "The main table is for the board and donors. The scholarship children are at the tables by the back. You'll be more comfortable there. The scholarship children. Not the recipients, not our guests, not even the students. A category, seated by the back, near the service door, where the category belonged." Tess said, "Okay, thank you." She said it evenly. She came back to where I was standing, and she did not look at me, because she knew that if she looked at me she would see what was on my face, and she did not want to carry it. I said nothing. I want to be honest with you about that silence, because it is the part of this story I have turned over the most. I am 45 years old. I have spent 22 years running into buildings other people are running out of. I'm not a man who has trouble speaking up, and I stood in Charles Renner's dining room and said nothing, because I had done the math too. The math of what it costs a 12-year-old girl when her father makes a scene at the dinner she earned, versus what it costs her to be seated by the back door. I decided the second cost was smaller. I've thought about that math many times since. 40 minutes later, Charles Renner's 9-year-old son stopped breathing at the main table, and the only person in that room who closed the distance was the girl who had been told she'd be more comfortable by the back. She crossed 40 feet of dining room before I was fully out of my chair. She got there first. That is the story. Everything else is how it came to be true. Let me tell you who I am, because who I am is where my daughter's 40 feet came from. My name is Joel Hargrove. I've been a firefighter with the Kansas City Fire Department for 22 years, a paramedic for 19 of them. I work out of Station 19. I live in Waldo, in a brick bungalow my wife and I bought in 2012, 11 minutes from the station with the lights on and about 18 without. I joined the department at 23. Not out of a calling, not at first, out of the honest arithmetic of a young man who wanted work that meant something and paid steadily and did not happen at a desk. The calling came later, the way it does. It came the first time I did a shift on the medic unit and understood that the job was not fire. Fire is maybe 5% of the job. The job is people on the worst day of their life and the question of whether you can be useful inside someone else's worst day. Here is the thing that job teaches you, and it is the center of this whole story, so I want to say it carefully. When something goes wrong in a room full of people, a collapse, a seizure, a child choking, the room does not respond the way people believe it will. People believe that in an emergency, someone takes charge. What actually happens is that everyone waits to see who the someone is going to be. 20 adults will stand in a frozen half circle around a person dying on the floor, every one of them waiting, every one of them certain that somebody more qualified is about to step forward. Psychologists have a name for it. Medics have a shorter one. We call it the gap. The gap between seeing it and doing something is where people die. Not because the doing is hard. Abdominal thrusts are not hard. Compressions are not hard. not for the first 2 minutes. The hard part is being the person who moves while everyone else is still deciding whether it's really happening. I have watched the gap swallow people. I have arrived on scenes 8 minutes after a 911 call where 15 bystanders watched a man on the ground for 6 of those minutes before anyone touched him. Good people, kind people, frozen people. So when my daughter was 8 years old, I started closing her gap. But before I tell you about that, I have to tell you about Erin, because the teaching was mine and the walking toward was hers, and Tess got both. Erin was an emergency room nurse at a hospital I brought patients to for years before I worked up the nerve to say something to her that wasn't a patient handoff. If you have never watched a good ER nurse receive a critical patient, I don't have the words to fully give it to you, but I will try. The doors open. The stretcher comes through with a medic talking fast. Vitals, mechanism, meds given, times. Most people's faces do something with that information. Fear does something, or urgency, or importance. Erin's face did nothing except attention. She would look at the patient, not the monitor, the patient, and her voice would come out level and unhurried, and the level, unhurried voice would spread through the trauma bay like something poured into water, and the whole room would come down 2 notches and start working better. She was 23 when I met her. I was 29. I handed off a cardiac patient at 2 in the morning, and she caught an error in my drug timeline. Caught it gently, in front of no one, in a way that fixed the problem without costing me anything. And I stood in the ambulance bay afterward and told my partner I had just met the most competent human being in Kansas City. It took me 11 more handoffs to ask her to coffee. We were married in 2011. Tess came in 2013. And I got 8 years of watching Erin be Erin. In the ER, in our kitchen, in the pediatrician's office when Tess spiked a fever, at a car accident we drove past on I-4-35, where she was out of our vehicle and moving before I had finished pulling onto the shoulder. Walk toward it. Flat voice. Look at the person, not the noise. She didn't teach that. She just was it, in front of a small daughter who read everything completely, from left to right, missing nothing. Erin died in March of 2019. Bacterial meningitis. I am going to tell it the way it happened, because the speed is the thing that people don't understand about that disease. On Monday, she worked a 12-hour shift and came home tired in the ordinary way. On Tuesday, she had a headache she rated a 6 and took ibuprofen for. Tuesday night, the headache was a 9 and her neck was stiff, and she said the words herself. She was the one who said meningitis, we go now. And I drove her to her own emergency room, where people who loved her did everything, and everything was right, and none of it was enough. She was unconscious by Wednesday evening. She died Friday morning. She was 33. Tess was 6. There was nothing to prevent. I need you to know that, because this next part gets misunderstood otherwise. I did not start teaching my daughter emergency medicine because of what happened to her mother. Nothing Tess could have learned would have changed that Friday. Meningitis is not a bystander problem. I started teaching her for the same reason a carpenter's kid knows what a true joint looks like, and a mechanic's kid knows what a healthy engine sounds like. It was the family trade. Her mother received the emergencies and her father drove into them, and the knowledge that lived in both of us was hers by inheritance, and I was the only one left to hand it over. The Sundays started when she was 8. Station 19 on a Sunday morning is a quiet church of a place. The trucks in their bays, coffee going, the off-shift slowness. My captain, Dele Osei, 54 years old with 30 years on the job and a laugh you can hear from the apparatus floor to the kitchen, waved her in the first morning like she was reporting for duty. He called her Proby by the second visit. He has never once called her anything else. We started with the mannequin. If you have taken a CPR class, you know the mannequin, the torso with the compressible chest, the head that tilts. We had the child version and the adult version, and the choking trainer, which is a torso with an airway you load a foam plug into, so that a correct abdominal thrust actually ejects the obstruction, and an incorrect one doesn't. I taught her compressions first, because compressions are rhythm and depth and courage, and an 8-year-old can learn all 3. Then choking response, because choking is the emergency a kid is most likely to actually stand in front of. A classmate at lunch, a cousin at Thanksgiving, a grandparent. I taught it as a script, the way we learn it, because scripts survive adrenaline and improvisation doesn't. See it, name it, move, see it, hands at the throat, or just the silence. A person choking badly doesn't gasp and flail like the movies. A person coughing has air. A person making noise has air. It is the silent one who is dying. I told her that sentence maybe 100 times over 4 years until she could say it back flat, like Aaron would have. Coughing means air. Silence means go. Name it. You ask, loud, are you choking? Can you cough? Because the question is diagnosis and permission at once. If they can answer, you wait and watch. If they can't, you have consent by silence and you go. Move, behind them. Fist above the navel, thumb side in. Other hand over the fist. In and up, hard, like you're trying to lift them off their feet from the inside. Again, until it's out or they're out, and if they go out, you lower them and start compressions and you have somebody call. She practiced on that trainer 4 years of Sundays. 50 ejected foam plugs a year, conservatively. Captain Osei used to time her from across the bay, see it to first thrust. And by the time she was 11, her time was better than half the recruits. One Sunday when she was 10, driving home, she asked me why we drilled it so much when she already knew it. I gave her the sentence that I believe more than I believe almost anything, the one I had been building toward for 2 years. The gap between seeing it and doing something is where people die. Everyone sees. Almost nobody moves. We train the gap closed. She looked out the window for a while. Then she said, so the training isn't the hands. The hands are easy. The training is going. 10 years old. Her mother, looking out my truck window at Warnell Road. The scholarship was hers alone. I want that on the record, too. In the fall of 2024, Tess's 7th grade science teacher entered her water filtration project into a district showcase. Tess had spent a summer building a gravity-fed filtration prototype out of hardware store parts, sand, activated carbon, a cloth pre-filter, a flow regulator she designed herself after the first 3 versions clogged, because she had read about water crises and had gotten quietly, privately furious in the way she gets, and her fury turns into notebooks and prototypes. The Renner Foundation gives 12 STEM scholarships a year to Kansas City public school students. Tuition support through high school, a lab equipment grant, and a mentorship program pairing students with working engineers. Tess won one. The letter came in November, and she read it twice from left to right, missing nothing, and then she looked up and said, Dad, the mentorship is real engineers. That was the part she cared about, not the money. She is 12. The money was my part to care about, and on a firefighter's salary I cared about it plenty. She cared about the engineers. The dinner invitation came in April. Heavy cream paper, dark blue ink. The Renner family and the foundation board request the pleasure of your company at the annual Scholars Dinner. The Renner Estate, Mission Hills, May 17th, 7 o'clock. Recipients and 1 parent. She wore the dress Fran, my mother, took her to buy, and she prepared for that dinner the way she prepares for everything. She read the Foundation's annual report. She read about Charles Renner, the freight empire, the 2,000 trucks, the logistics network across 11 states. She wrote 4 questions about the mentorship program in the small notebook she carries, and she practiced asking them out loud to me at the kitchen table, and I sat there being the pretend board of a pretend foundation and thinking that whatever room she walked into deserved her. Then we walked into the room, and the room put her by the service door. I have been in the houses of the wealthy many times. People forget that about my job. The ambulance goes everywhere. I have done CPR on marble floors under chandeliers and in kitchens the size of my whole first floor. Wealth does not impress me and does not offend me. Houses are just buildings with people in them, and the people are just people. And I have seen every kind of person be brave and every kind be useless. So it was not the house. The house was fine. It was the 2 round tables. They had done it smoothly. I'll give them that. The tables by the back were dressed like the main table. Same linens, same flowers. A photographer moved through before the meal and gathered the 12 scholarship students for pictures with Mr. Renner near the fireplace, each kid getting a handshake and 11 seconds. And I understood, watching it, that the photographs were the point of the evening as far as the Foundation's website was concerned, and that the photographs were now done, and so, functionally, were the students. The recipients and their parents were seated at the 2 round tables. Nurses' aides and warehouse supervisors and a city bus driver and me, the parents of the exceptional children, holding wine glasses near the service door while the door swung and the staff moved past our chairs all night. Tess sat beside me with her notebook in her small purse and her 4 questions unasked. At the main table, Charles Renner sat at the head. His wife, Celeste, sat midway down among the donors, and between Celeste and a man in a very good suit sat a boy of about 9 in a navy blazer, Wesley Renner, their son, visibly bored in the specific honest way of a 9-year-old at a 2-hour adult dinner, sword-fighting his fork against an invisible opponent until his mother's hand settled his arm. Tess watched the room. She always watches the room. At one point she said, quietly, not complaining, just filing the observation, "The board members haven't come to our tables." I said, "No." She said, "The invitation said join the Renner family for dinner." I said, "It did say that." She thought about it, and then she did the thing that undoes me about her, the thing that is pure Erin. She set it down. Not swallowed it. Set it down, deliberately, like a tool she wasn't currently using. She said, "Their food is the same as our food. I checked the plates going by." And she went back to her chicken. 40 minutes into dinner. Main course nearly done. The room loud with the warm, self-sustaining noise of 20 conversations. And then, at the main table, Wesley Renner laughed at something the man in the good suit said, laughed with his mouth full, and the laugh cut off in the middle. I did not see the exact moment. I have reconstructed it from what Tess saw, because Tess saw it whole. My chair was angled half away from the main table, toward a warehouse supervisor telling me about his son's robotics team. Tess sat facing the room. She saw the laugh stop. She saw the boy's shoulders come up. She saw both of his hands rise toward his throat. The universal sign, the one on the poster in every restaurant kitchen in America, the one almost nobody has seen performed by an actual dying child. And she saw the silence. Coughing means air. Silence means go. She was moving before I knew there was anywhere to move to. Here is what 40 seconds looks like, told by the man who covered it in second place. Celeste Renner asked her son if he was okay. That was the first second. The reasonable question, asked of a boy who could not answer it, and the not answering read to her, for one more second, as maybe drama, maybe a game, because the mind protects itself, and the last thing a mother's mind will accept is the true thing. The man in the good suit understood faster than she did. He began pounding. Wesley on the back. Wesley upright in the chair, the blows landing between his shoulder blades with real force and no mechanics behind them. Well meant and useless, and I want to be fair to that man. He moved. He was the only adult at that table who moved. He just didn't know what moving correctly looked like. Someone stood up so fast a chair went over. A woman's voice said, "Is there a doctor?" with the pitch already climbing, and that pitch did what that pitch does. It announced the emergency to 22 adults simultaneously, and 22 adults did what untrained rooms do. The room froze into noise. Everyone stood. Nobody advanced. A ring of guests rose around that table like a fence being built around the exact spot where help needed to go, every one of them certain that the someone was about to appear. I was up by then. I want you to understand. I was up. I was moving. 22 years of moving toward had me out of the chair while the woman's voice was still climbing. But I was 40 feet away with my back half turned at the start of it, and between me and that boy was a dining room full of standing, frozen, well-dressed vents. Tess had line of sight and a 2-second head start, and she had spent 4 years of Sundays training exactly one skill above all others. Going. She went through a gap between 2 donors without touching either of them. She arrived at Wesley's chair and her voice came out loud and flat. Flat, in a room going shrill, a 12-year-old producing the one register that cuts through panic. And she said the script. "Are you choking? Can you cough?" Wesley's eyes found her. His mouth worked. No sound. Consent by silence. She said, to the man in the good suit, still winding up for another back blow, "Stop. I've got him." and she got the boy's arm and pulled him up out of the chair because you cannot do thrusts properly on a seated person wedged behind a table, and she stepped behind him, and I watched my daughter's hands do the thing they had done 200 times on a foam-loaded trainer in the bay of Station 19. Fist above the navel, thumb side in, other hand locked over it. In and up, hard. Nothing. In and up, hard. Nothing. And I was through the fence now, 8 feet out, close enough to see her face, and her face did nothing except attention. In and up. The food came out of Wesley Renner and landed on the tablecloth of the main table, and the boy took a breath that tore the whole room open. That ragged, whooping, unlovely, magnificent sound. The best sound that exists. The sound of an airway coming back online. And his legs buckled, and that is the moment I finally arrived, in time to catch him under the arms and put him in a chair. Second place. I got there in time to do the aftercare. I knelt in front of the boy and did my job. Watched the breathing settle, checked that the airway was staying clear, kept my voice at the level, unhurried register that pours into a room like something into water. I heard myself talking to Celeste Renner, who was on her knees beside me with her hands shaking on her son's arm. He's okay. He's breathing well. Look, his color's coming back. And then the professional part, the part people don't know. He still needs to be seen tonight. Abdominal thrusts can bruise things inside. It's almost certainly fine. He gets checked anyway. I'll wait with you for EMS if you'd like. I'm a paramedic. She looked at me for a long second, and then past me, at the girl standing beside the wrecked place settings of the main table. The whole room was looking at the girl. 22 adults, all of whom had stood, none of whom had crossed, all of them now looking at a 12-year-old in a dress her grandmother bought her, and I watched the room do its arithmetic. The same arithmetic, face by face, arriving face by face at the same total, the girl from the table by the back. Charles Renner had come around from the head of the table at some point in the 40 seconds. He was standing 3 feet from his son with the expression of a man whose entire operational competence, 2,000 trucks of it, had just been demonstrated to run in the wrong direction, and he looked at Tess, and Tess looked back at him with her mother's face, attention, nothing else, and he said, hoarse, the only true thing available to him, Thank you. Tess said, he should still see a doctor tonight. My dad will explain why. Then she straightened one of the fallen chairs, because it was in the way, and stood next to me with her hands folded, and waited to be useful further, and was not needed further, and the ambulance came, and Wesley Renner rode to the hospital with his mother, and was fine. Total time, silence to breath. I have run it back 100 times. Under 40 seconds. The gap, trained closed. We left before dessert. It felt like the right size of exit. No speeches, no room full of people needing to do something with their faces about us. I found the foundation's director, told her where to reach me for any follow-up, shook 2 hands, and took my daughter home. She was quiet in the truck down Ward Parkway, and I let her be quiet because I know what the after looks like. The adrenaline goes out of you like a tide and takes some of your certainty with it, and even the pros get the shakes at minute 20, and I watched her hands in her lap and waited. At the light at Gregory, she said, his face was starting to change color, at the end, right before the third one worked. I said, yes, you were inside the window the whole time. You had more time than it felt like. She nodded. She knew that. She needed it said out loud anyway. That's not weakness. That's how debriefs work. We do it at the station after every bad call. Then she said, everybody stood up. Did you see that? Everybody stood up and made a circle and just stood. I said, I saw. She said, why? And I gave her the honest answer, the one from 22 years, because everyone was waiting to find out who the someone was going to be. That's what people do. It's not evil. It's just what untrained rooms do. Everyone waits for someone. She looked out the window at Waldo going by. The bungalows, the porch lights, the ordinary unphotographed neighborhood where we live, and she said the thing I have been carrying around ever since, the thing I will be carrying the rest of my life. Everyone was waiting for someone else to be the someone. I'm someone. I drove the rest of the way home very carefully because my eyes were not entirely reliable. Her mother used to walk toward car accidents on the interstate with exactly that sentence in her posture. Aaron never said it. She didn't have to. She was it, in front of a small daughter who read everything completely and missed nothing. And 6 years after we lost her, her disposition crossed 40 feet of a Mission Hills dining room in a dress and closed a dead man's gap in under 40 seconds. The hands were mine. 4 years of Sundays, the mannequin, the script, Captain Osei's stopwatch. The hands were Station 19's. The going was Aaron's. Tess is both of us, and also, in the way of the best children, mainly herself. Charles Renner called me on Wednesday, 4 days later. He did not send a gift. I want to note that because it is the first thing he got right. Men in his position solve things with objects and checks, and a check that week would have landed like a tip, and some instinct in him knew it. He called himself, no assistant, and he said, "Mr. Hargrove, I'd like to apologize to your daughter and to you, and I'd like to do it in person, and I'd like to come to you." To us. Mission Hills asking directions to Waldo. He came Saturday morning. I will tell you plainly that I watched Charles Renner fold himself into a chair at my kitchen table, the table where Tess had rehearsed her 4 questions for the pretend board, and accept coffee from my mother, Fran, who treated him precisely the way she treats everyone, which is to say warmly and without ceremony, and the reversal of it was not lost on him. I think the reversal was half of why he came. Some apologies required geography. Wesley was with him. The boy had asked to come. He stood in my kitchen and shook Tess's hand with the huge solemnity of a 9-year-old performing a ceremony he had invented himself, and said, "Thank you for saving my life," clearly rehearsed in the car, and Tess said, "You're welcome. You did the right thing with your hands, you know. The sign. That's how I knew fast." And Wesley looked as though he had been awarded something, and the two of them went out back to look at the filtration prototype on the porch, because Tess does not linger inside heavy moments, and that was the end of the ceremony as far as the children were concerned. The adults stayed at the table. Renner wrapped his hands around the coffee cup, and he did not perform, and I will give him credit for the exactness of what he said, because vague apologies are cheap, and this was not one. He said, "I want to name what I did, because I've spent 4 days on it and I don't want to round it off. My foundation selected 12 children for being exceptional. I invited them to my table. The invitation says my table, and then I seated them by the service door where I wouldn't have to talk to them, so that the photographs could happen and the dinner could stay comfortable. Your daughter asked to sit at the main table because she had prepared questions about engineering. She had done more preparation for my dinner than I had, and I told her she'd be more comfortable by the back." He turned the cup a quarter turn. He said, 10 minutes later, every person at my comfortable table stood in a circle and watched my son die, and the child I sent to the back walked through them and saved him. I have run a logistics company for 30 years, Mr. Hargrove. My entire business is putting the right resource in the right place. I had the single most competent person in that room, and I optimized her to the wrong table. I said, "Joel." He said, "Joel, I'm not going to insult you by asking what I owe you, because I already know the answer is nothing, and that the question itself is the wrong shape. So I'll ask a different one. Your daughter did something Saturday that most adults can't do. I'd like to ask her, with your permission, what she thinks I should do. Not for her, in general. I find I trust her judgment about rooms." So we called Tess in from the porch, and Charles Renner asked a 12-year-old for a recommendation, and my daughter stood at the end of my kitchen table where the pretend board used to sit, and she was ready, because she is always ready, because she had, of course, already thought about it. She said, "Wesley is alive because somebody taught me. That's the whole reason. Not because I'm special, because I got taught, over and over until the gap closed. Most kids don't have a firehouse." She let that sit for a second, the way I taught her a report should land. "Your foundation is already in the schools. You already know how to run a program. Put first aid in it, CPR, choking response, bleeding control, the real training, with the trainers and the mannequins done every year so it sticks. Every kid in the district. Then every room a Kansas City kid stands in has a someone in it." Renner looked at her for a long moment. He said, "What's it cost?" Tess said, "I don't know. You have people for that, but it's less than one of your trucks." Fran laughed out loud from the counter. Renner laughed too, the first unguarded thing he'd done in my house. Fran said, refilling his cup without asking. She prices things in trucks now. You did that to yourself with the invitation. Renner said, Yes, considerably less than one of my trucks. He took out an actual paper notebook. I liked him more for the notebook, and wrote for a minute, and then he asked Tess one more question. Will you help launch it? The first training group? I'd like the first class taught somewhere real. And Tess said, Station 19. Sunday mornings are quiet. Ask for Captain Osei. Then, after a beat, and the first class should be the other 11. The scholarship students. They were at the back tables too. They go first. The Renner Foundation announced the program in August. District-wide, every school, every year, CPR, choking response, bleeding control, taught by certified instructors with real equipment, funded for 10 years with an endowment attached so it survives any one man's attention span. The district's press release used a phrase I recognized because the man had asked my permission to use it, and I had asked my daughter, and my daughter had shrugged and said the sentence wasn't hers. It was just true. They called it Closing the Gap. The first class ran on a Sunday morning in September, in the bay of Station 19, between the pumper and the medic unit. Coffee going, Captain Osei presiding with his stopwatch. 11 scholarship students in a semicircle around the choking trainer, the nurse's aide's kids and the bus driver's kid and the warehouse supervisor's kid with the robotics team, and my daughter at the front of them with the foam plug in her hand, loading the airway, saying the script in a voice that was flat and level and poured into that garage like something into water. Coughing means air. Silence means go. Wesley Renner was there too. He had asked to be. He is not a scholarship student. He is a 9-year-old who wanted to learn the thing that saved him, and Tess put him in the front, and his father stood at the back of the bay next to me, by the door, near where the service entrance of a fire station would be if a fire station had one, and neither of us said anything about the geometry of that, but we both noticed it. He wanted the back. He was learning the room from the other side. I watched Tess time the first student from see it to first thrust. I watched her correct a fist placement without making the kid feel corrected, gently, in front of no one, in a way that fixed the problem without costing anything. Her mother's move. Her mother's exact move, performed at a hospital handoff in 2009 on a 29-year-old medic who never recovered from it. Aaron received the emergencies. I drove into them. Our daughter teaches other people's children to close the gap. The trade continues. Charles Renner leaned over to me at one point, watching her run the drill, and said quietly, Next year's dinner is one table. I had them measure the room. It fits. I said, I know it fits. I've seen the room. He said, You'll come? I said, Ask her. He smiled and shook his head slowly, watching Tess reload the trainer, and he said, She'll say yes, and then tell me where everyone should sit. She did say yes, and she did tell him. Before you go, I want to ask you something. Have you ever stood in a frozen room, a moment when everyone saw what was happening and everyone waited, and watched who moved, or been the one who moved? The gap between seeing and doing is where the worst things happen, and it can be trained closed. In you, in your kids, in one Sunday morning. Tell me about it in the comments. I read every single one. If this story stayed with you today, share it with one person who needs to hear it. You already know who that is, and if you're new here, subscribe. Every week, a story like this one. Real people, real decisions, the kind that stay with you.